So our first panel is a conversation with a group of current and former county commissioners and judges. The panel is going to be moderated today by the Honorable Jan Rowe, who served as the Robertson County Judge until 2014 and is the current board president of the Brazos Valley Groundwater Conservation District. I will leave it to her to introduce her panelists, but please join me in welcoming our first panel to the stage.
The glasses are necessary these days, folks. Okay, thank you for allowing us to participate like this today. It's very important to discuss these issues and share ideas and experience. And having said that, our first panelist is a Hays County business owner. He is currently the chairman of the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization. He served 13 years as a Hays County Commissioner and led county efforts, among other things, to protect water and natural resources. He was the lead architect of the Hays County Conservation Plan and led county efforts to pass the critical Save Our Wells legislation to protect local groundwater. Would you please help me welcome former Hays County Commissioner Will Conley. Third from the end. Okay, and next we have another long-serving county commissioner. He's former county commissioner of Bell County. He was born and raised in Bell County and attended Texas A&M University. Sorry, it just comes out. Has a degree in environmental design and a master's in land development. Tim served, he was first elected in 1994 and served until 2017, so he really got a dose of county government. He's been extremely involved in the establishment of the Clearwater Underground Water Conservation District, and as a commissioner, was one of the founders and two-term presidents of the North America Super Collider Coalition. So he's very involved in issues that address his local government and his regional government and his state government. Help me welcome, please, former Bell County Commissioner Tim Brown. And finally, really a slow learner. He's still in I'm sorry, Judge. Currently, the county judge in Pecos County and has been in elected office in that position since 2003. He's been in the business world and served as a businessman since 1973. He started Shuster Enterprises and was president until he sold the business in '98. He is leading by example in Pecos County, where issues that address all of our needs and all of even our controversies he's dealt with and he's managed well. Would you help me welcome to the stage current county judge, the Honorable Joe Shuster. And we're going to begin our discussion today on sort of the formal roles in county government and groundwater districts and how each of us have navigated those roles. And I'll leave that generally to the panel, and we'll try to help us move along as best as possible. So we'll have time for questions towards the end of the panel, and we've discussed earlier on a telephone conference call what some of the formal roles are, and we obviously, your Commissioners Court appoints your directors to the district, but there are some other formal roles, and I'd like to start with Will. and ask you what your experience in county government as a commissioner, what your formal roles were, and we can just sort of pass that down. If either of you have something different to add, let's add that to that. If we need to redirect, then please feel free.
Well, thank you, Judge, and thank y'all for having me here today. There are some formal roles, although they're limited for county government in the state of Texas. In our subdivision rules and regulations, we had a groundwater availability requirement in Hays County that was required to go through the plating process. We did a lot in regards to parks and conservation. That is a formal role of county government, and we did a tremendous amount of that. And in Hays County, not maybe directly related to groundwater, but obviously has an impact as you're going around conserving sensitive areas and taking down development rights and other conservation issues in regards to your county. And then in our county, we have elected boards on our groundwater district, so we did not have any appointment authority unless there was somebody was dismissed from the board or somebody had to step down, and then we made a temporary appointment.
I'll just step back for just a second. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the chance to be here and commend this audience. I've been to so many conferences where you're speaking to a handful of people in a great big room, and it's nice to see the interest in this topic. As has already been stated, the counties have limited roles really with groundwater per se. But if you look at the kind of the underlying purpose for what we do, we have a responsibility to try to protect property rights and manage growth. And there's a balancing act there. Bell County, where I've served for a long time, happens to be a high growth county. And early in my tenure in the county, I recognized that water is going to be critical to continue to sustain the growth that we have. The flip side of that is that the impacts of growth on our natural resources have got to be taken into consideration as well. And counties don't have the tools necessarily to do those sorts of things. So those are vested with groundwater districts. So we took the necessary steps early on to create a district in Bell County. Fortunately, enabling statute had already been passed and had just been sitting on the shelf for a number of years. And we pulled that out and dusted it off and studied the issues and went out and called the election and got that process started and got the district created. Like Hays County, we have provisions in our subdivision ordinances that mandate a certification of available water as part of the subdivision process. And I'm surprised some counties don't do that. But that's one of the key things that counties can do. It is within our statutory authority. And I think it's a responsible thing for us to do because it makes no sense to allow somebody to develop property if there's not some assurance that there's going to be available water or sufficient water to sustain the use of that property over time. We've got another issue that's popped up in Bell County that Hays County has grappled with as well, and that's endangered species issues. We are both on the Edwards aquifer. The spring systems that are fed by that aquifer are home to a number of unique species, and the potential bad news was that the listing of those species could have been a major impediment to growth. We felt it was necessary to be proactive and invest in science to develop the necessary response to the listing proposal. We have built relationships with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and other partners that, and in partnership, the county and our groundwater district working in partnership, jointly funding research that has been very successful in building an ongoing kind of balance against the needs to protect the species and protect the aquifer, which I look at as being synonymous, and at the same time not put an undue hammer on growth. We've been able to facilitate growth.
I, like the others, would like to say thank you for inviting me. I don't know that you invited the right person, but I can tell you the Pecos County story. We started in 1999, and between 1999 and 2002, we finally elected our first officers. And I was elected as county judge in 2003, and that's when the storm hit. We in Pecos County are 4,700 square miles, so our district covers Pecos County only. And we had some people that wanted to basically sell water from Pecos County to Midland and Odessa area to supply the water source of what was at that time a depleting service through the water system that Midland and Odessa and Big Springs and Abilene and San Angelo belonged to because of a drought. And so we had some water marketers that were trying to sell the water. So the county and the district stood shoulder to shoulder, and we trudged through the battle. It took over 8 years, 2 lawsuits, but we finally come to an agreement of having a drawdown. And when everybody came to that agreement, to the drawdown, then everybody was happy. We haven't heard anything since then too much, other than we do have monitoring wells throughout Pecos County, and our groundwater system is doing a great job of that. The thing is, now we have a Johnny-come-lately that was not part of the 2 lawsuits, and they're wanting to be part of that lawsuit. So we may be headed to another lawsuit again. So this has happened since 2003, and this is 2019. I only have three and a half years to go, so I don't know how much longer it is. Thank you.
And that is why I refer to myself as a recovering elected official. Okay, thank you. That really is, it was a nice breadth of information, a variety of information. The informal roles that the county commissioners and judges can play in groundwater management, scientific study, funding, well, actually the litigation aspect of it. Those are some things that are on our agenda to discuss today. One of the things that I saw as an elected official from 7 to 14, it seemed that there's a vast difference in the needs of an urban area and a rural area, and there seemed to be developing a legislation that ran along those lines, and so it sort of pitted the big guys and the little guys. And we've experienced some of that from both sides of that coin. So what are some of your thoughts and some of your experience with providing funding and partnering with your districts in scientific study and potentially everybody has to have water, but it's the management that concerns all of us and what's fair for everybody. So what are some of your experiences in that? We'll start at the other end. Judge, can we back up with you?
Okay. In 2003, the Groundwater Committee in Fort Stockton, Pecos County, got together with the county, and we partnered up with a U.S. Geological Survey to see what the different aquifers in Pecos County were and were like. And so that took a couple of $100,000 and about 2 years for them to come up with the results. And during that same 2-year period, the marketers were doing their water studies and so on and so forth. So after that, we came to a meeting and had a meeting where there was actually 3 different water studies that had been done, and that's where the lawsuit started. So after that, well, it took, like I said, 8 years to settle out lawsuits and get us going in the right direction, which was a drawdown, and everybody agreed to. So it was money well spent, and I know it was time consuming. I never thought it would have taken that long to do it, but it is time consuming. I could say one thing: I've learned a lot about water in the last 20 years, more than I ever thought I would ever learn.
I've already mentioned the endangered species issue. I'll step back on that for just a second. Politics varies so much from county to county, and there are those commissioners' courts that are perfectly happy for that to be somebody else's problem. And I've watched as neighboring counties have refused to engage and have in fact developed adversarial relationships about those kinds of issues. And I think that's the wrong approach, because I think it's everybody's problem. And that's the reason we chose to partner with our groundwater district, while groundwater districts have the mandate, of course, to manage those resources. I think we all benefit from developing a better understanding of what the underlying hydrogeology is, and so we can develop the kind of tools that are necessary to do a good job and be good stewards. Go back to the other thing that I mentioned, managing growth. We have always either required that a developer be able to show connectivity to a public water supply system or have sufficient groundwater. And the truth of the matter is there's a lot to be learned on what sufficient is and what that really means. And we've witnessed some areas in Bell County already where some pretty significant subdivisions were done with total reliance on groundwater in an aquifer that was deemed to be virtually inexhaustible when I was a kid. And we've come to realize over the last 10 or 15 years it's certainly not inexhaustible. It is a finite resource. The question is, what is the rate of drawdown? What level of utilization is sustainable? And those are questions that can only be answered by ongoing research. So even though that's really the groundwater district's responsibility, is certainly to the benefit of the county to understand, so that we make the right decisions when we approve or disapprove a subdivision or put certain requirements, density requirements, or that sort of thing. So I think partnering with the districts in those kinds of research projects is an absolute, it's a fundamental responsibility, I think, for county governments.
Well, thank you. To put into a little bit of context, and I know there's a lot of people here that know this area in our state and our region well, but I served four terms as a county commissioner in Hays County from 2005 to 2018, in which most of the time we were the fastest or one of the fastest growing counties in the United States of America. Also, you had a very different county along I-35 and even Highway 290 that runs through Hays County, and the more central western rural parts of Hays County and Henley and Wimberley and in the Driftwood area. We have 4 different conservation districts. So there's a lot of layers and complications to Hays County, and I had the privilege of serving there for a long time and trying to do our best with my colleagues to work through those issues. And when we talked about the formal, I didn't have a whole lot to say, because there's not a lot to say about the formality of county government and groundwater in the state of Texas. But there's a tremendous amount I found that you can do informally, working with your groundwater districts, working with your state agencies, working with your state legislature to move the agenda of an overall higher quality of life and the protection of those resources in your community. In my community, my precinct started with Ocarina Springs at San Marcos River and ended pretty close to Jacob's Well. If any of y'all are familiar with those resources, I had probably about 65% of the Blanco River in my precinct. So I was blessed with some of the most beautiful natural resources in the state of Texas. And you try to find that balance, and you learn how things change as we went through drought. People's mannerisms and their attitudes changed towards groundwater use, and then it really changed when we too, Judge, had water marketers come into our county and tried to take advantage of some loopholes that were in our laws, where basically you could drill through a couple of districts and get to a point of just non-regulation in regards to our groundwater use. We fought that with everything that we had at the legislature, and we passed House Bill 3405, which covered what we called those white zones in that area, and gave the Barton Edwards Groundwater District the ability and the authority to properly manage those areas. As a county working with all our groundwater districts, we funded millions of dollars and infrastructure and monitoring wells to develop that science all across Hays County, which is complicated because we're talking about predominantly karst features here. So it acts very differently all around the county. It acts very differently lots of times as we were going through a drought, and I learned just literally across the street from a lot of the people that I used to represent, Judge. So we have made those investments with our groundwater districts. I think conservatively have taken their monitoring systems 10, 15 years out into the future of what they would have been on their own. And then working with them politically as well is a big help to a groundwater district. Most groundwater districts are volunteer elected officials. No offense to any of y'all, most of you kind of wonky and really get into the details and the passion of protecting the groundwater, and that's why you're there. But that sometimes doesn't translate into good legislative intent and change at the legislature. So
Political capital.
Yeah, a little political capital. And counties are still fairly respected at the Capitol. I put a little quote on that because those things seem to be changing. But we do walk in with some type of status and some of that political capital, Judge, that a lot of groundwater districts just frankly don't have. And we were proud to stand hand in hand with our groundwater districts and to work to continue to evolve our rules and regulations and statutory authority for those groundwater districts in Hays County in order to protect our resources, to protect private property rights. Forever, the discussion was private property rights was on the side of opposing any type of reasonable regulatory action. People in Hays County soon found out that without any type of reasonable regulatory management, their property rights very well may be taken. And so it became not a one versus the other. They became very much the same. And so if you ever have a county official or a county that tells you that they can't do anything in regards to groundwater, and show them examples across our state of a lot of different counties that have been very active in groundwater management, directly or indirectly.
Thank you very much. Relationships between county judges, county commissioners, groundwater districts, groundwater district managers, they should be cultivated. I think it benefits both parties, and it benefits the people that we all serve to have those good relationships and to understand to whom to ask the question, to whom to present the problem, and how to really go forward with addressing whatever issue it is that you're trying to remedy or rectify. So building on those relationships, what would you like to see? What would we each like to see from our groundwater districts? I know in our county and in our district, Brazos Valley Groundwater Conservation District, our district manager makes presentations at least annually. He's very active in our commissioners' courts, but also in our schools, and we have public relations things that go on. We want to be visible, and so that's something that can help the counties in their presentation and in their effect of partnering or cooperative efforts with the districts. So what are some of your thoughts or maybe some of your experiences with developing those relationships and how those help them with the public in conservation measures and in your budgeting. If you've got to budget funds for litigation or for monitoring wells or for any of those things, how does that help you to have those good relationships?
Let me start.
Yeah.
Well, it's just like any other relationship, Judge. I mean, it's something you have to commit some time to, and have an open mind with the other electeds or appointed officials that are there, and their staffs, and really take the time to fully understand the complication of the issue and be ready to lead and to make sure that y'all are using the same terminology, using the same, I hate to use the word talking points, but the same points to where you have a consistent message to the people you mutually represent in your community. These aren't easy issues. I don't think they're easy anywhere in the state, particularly where I come from. They're very complicated issues, and most people, rightfully so, don't understand the complication or the liability or the detriment that could be caused. I used to always say, to state the obvious, I'd much rather be conservative with our groundwater because it's not something you can really easily put back in a box. It's not something you can just fix overnight. Yeah, if you can fix it, it's going to probably take a generation to fix it if you mess it up. So we've been trying to walk that fine line. We've been able to have a tremendous amount of economic growth in Hays County, create a lot of job opportunities, a lot of value, develop the appropriate infrastructure and state highway system and floodplain mitigation and all these types of things. But part of that infrastructure need is conservation. Part of that infrastructure need are these monitoring wells to make sure that you have a comprehensive approach to those things to address all the issues that are important in a growing community, particularly a community that relies so much not on only for the groundwater for consumers and constituents, but for our environment and our ecological system.
Let me add collaboration between your county government and your conservation district on proposed and pending legislation. Do you discuss those things? Do you get on the same page? Do you evaluate? So let's add that.
That's, Judge, that's exactly what I was just going to kind of go toward. There's more expertise in this room on hydrogeology, on groundwater availability, on the threats than your typical elected official will ever have. And so translating your knowledge into something that can be utilized by local officials like county officials and the state officials who are responsible for writing policy at the state level is absolutely essential. And so education and outreach have got to be part of your mandate. I've been spoiled. I happen to live in a county where we have an outstanding district, superb executive director and staff, and they do all the things that you mentioned, and work very closely through the state association down here with our state leaders in the legislature, and that's so critical because what the legislature does in the long run sets the stage for what county officials certainly can and cannot do, but everything else from there down. I hate to be cynical. I've gotten to be kind of a cynical I started to say something, but I was in politics way too long. But the truth of the matter is, I've seen bad policy come out of the Capitol over and over and over again, and I don't think it's out of callous indifference. I think it's a lack of understanding most of the time. So education is absolutely essential. Vertically through the entire system of government to try to be sure that we're all on the same page and recognizing what our challenges are and trying to construct policy that can be effective in addressing those challenges.
We too have had an open door policy between the county and the water district. Ty Edwards and I both have each other's emails, cell phone numbers, and we don't even hesitate to call each other whether it's a weekend or not. And that's the way it should be, because over the last 9 sessions that I've been going to and attending, there's been an array of good bills and bad bills. And you spend a lot of time on trying to kill the bad bills. And it takes away the opportunity for you to spend time on getting good bills through, both in water, and it all affects water for cities and counties and other districts. So that sometime the legislatures, I have no idea where they come from on some of these bills, but they do. And those are the bad ones that we need to spend a lot of time killing. And in Pecos County, we are a rural county. We don't have population growth like Bell and Hayes County do, but we do have growth in water sales due to the fact of the oil field. And the oil field is our predominant customer right now as far as water being sold. And so with the monitoring system that the district has put in over the last several years, it is paying for itself, and we do have some control there, and it's not a bad thing. So, you know, I praise the Lord that we did the right thing starting in 1999. Had we waited until this year to start, we'd have been up a creek without a paddle. We've had Comanche Springs that dried up, and our Comanche Springs was prolific, as well as Balmorhea and these other springs across the state. But they dried up in 1955, I believe it was. And they still come back in the wintertime when the farming lets up, but they only flow about 3 to 4 months during the wintertime. Start about December, and they'll start flowing then and then die back come 1st of March when farming starts. So we are tied to springs, and Comanche Spring used to flow something like 200,000 gallons per minute, and it's gone. And once a spring is gone, the hope of bringing it back is very slim. And it's people like us and water districts across the state that need to be mindful and protective of that water. Because if it's gone, it's gone. And I'll use an old saying that a friend of mine from Midland used to say: water's for fighting and whiskey's for drinking. And there's a lot of truth to that. So we need to be mindful to be careful with the water we have.
Thank you, Judge. Okay. We're going to start and offer the panel for questions from the floor or from the live feed. If you have a question, we should have some microphones in the aisles. If you'll let someone know, they'll bring you the microphone. Microphone set up on each side.
If they can actually step to the mics rather than, if they can step to the mics.
Okay,
to ask
yes, if
questions.
they'll step to the mic, I'm sorry.
And I do have a couple questions that came in using the conference app and Twitter. So
Oh, good
thank
deal.
you folks who are taking advantage of that. The first question that came in was to ask about the level of public participation that you've seen during your time in office. And I'd maybe expand on that in terms of groundwater as well, you know, just generally, but then getting folks engaged in these important groundwater conversations.
Well, it's all a matter of perspective, and I'm sure there's a lot of active participation across our state, but where I come from, I'll put people out there in participation up against anybody in the state of Texas. You have an extremely active constituency in Hayes County, particularly in central and western Hayes County, and they come prepared with a tremendous amount of research and data and information from across our state, from across our nation on this subject matter. I was blessed to represent them for so long and absorbed a lot of that information, and there's so many talented people out there, you know, from the River System Institute there at the university to just all the people throughout that area. So we had and continue to have a tremendous amount of public participation and interest from a very diverse group of people. We talk about influencing the legislature. That is one piece of advice I'd give you is go up there and advocate as one, but have a diverse group of people. That can relate to a lot of different state reps, a lot of different state senators, and their staffs. Our groups looked like a really good Willie Nelson concert. I mean, you had rednecks and hippies and Greens and business people and scientists and all kinds of different folks collectively there together speaking in one voice. And a lot of people don't know what to do with that. When you're speaking as a comprehensive group with that diverse of a faction, it really speaks volumes.
I think our experience in Bell County is different. I would say there's a small core of really engaged, dedicated people who are interested in water issues and who make the effort to be informed and go to meetings and listen and learn and participate. But it's a fairly small group. We've been blessed in that we've not had a crisis yet, and nothing gets people stirred up like a good crisis, and we haven't had that yet. So the public, the flip side of that statement is that we tend to be complacent. We don't worry about the problem that's down the road or the problem that's somebody else's problem, and so we've really been blessed to the point that we've not had to face a real calamity, but. We've fortunately have had some proactive leadership and people who understand that that's just a matter of time. As our population continues to grow, we will reach a crisis point at some point in time. I think as long as the public's not too worried about it, that means that somebody's doing a pretty good job.
We started off just the opposite. We started off with a crisis back in 2003 and 4. And we filled the auditorium of the Civic Center with people, ranchers and farmers, and they were concerned about their water. And then we also had the citizens of Fort Stockton, and they filled that room too. So you had two different aspects there that were wanting to protect the water for different reasons. And so we had a crisis from the get-go. And since then, it's basically dwindled down to people just wanting permits and so on and so forth for new wells or increasing their water pumpage. And so it's not that bad anymore, but I've learned in this business, be careful when it gets quiet. So you never know, but our water district has done a great job in dealing with the new permits and increasing the old permits. So that's about all I can say about it.
There was a follow-up question on that one that came in. What are your recommendations for a GCD in strengthening ties with their local county commissioners and judges if those local elected officials aren't quite as enthusiastic about GCDs to begin with?
We have a thing called the election. And I do believe in election, and those people that refuse to work together for the best of the community as a whole, then it's up to the people at the ballot box to change those people. And that's the biggest thing I believe in. So
Don't stop trying. You've got to reach out. You've got to communicate. Continue the dialogue.
Yeah, it just takes time. And, unfortunately, some people run for public office with a strong ideological bias one direction or the other, and it's hard to change that. Sometimes you have to, it may take a crisis, or sometimes it just takes time. And I think that's the most important. If I were going to leave you with a single statement, it would be that your investment in science, good solid science, and your outreach. It doesn't do any good if you're the most capable expert in the world on your particular field of expertise if you keep it all in your head. You've got to be able to share what you know with those elected officials that can be either your best friend or your worst enemy.
I think the commissioner and the judge brought up some very good points. A Again, it's more about relationships than anything else. That's a good question. I would say, you know, I've been in county government since I'm 42, since I was 25 years old, and been around the state quite a bit and met a lot of county officials. And most county officials are experts in absolutely nothing. But the kind of Renaissance people, they know a little bit about everything because they have to. It's a reflection of their job. So first and foremost, don't come at them with, if you're one of these technical people that have 10,000 facts to share, you know, share a few of them starting off. Don't overwhelm them with a bunch of data in the beginning. If they're not showing interest in your issue, if you can politically and in your own soul, find something that you agree with them that is important to them and an issue that they're working on. Maybe you should work with them on that issue a little bit, build that relationship and that trust. And then once you get to that point, say, Judge, Commissioner, let me talk to you a little bit about groundwater again and some of these issues. Again, it's just working with people and building trust and relationships. Being part of what's important to them and what they're working on at the county means something to elected officials. And then once you're there, then you could talk about and advocate for other issues as well. But you just have to keep working, keep building. Don't talk down to people. Talk about partnerships. Talk about working together, and talk about, as the judge stated, the greater good for the community in which you represent.
We do have a couple more questions that came in. This one shifts gears a little bit. Do counties use modeled available groundwater, the MAG, to determine if a development has adequate water supply? And should they, even if they don't? So the question was whether or not counties, when they're doing that, you know, what did you refer to it as? Looking at the necessity, whether or not there's adequate water for a development, do they look at the modeled available groundwater that's used in the groundwater joint planning process to determine whether or not there really is that adequate supply? And should they be looking at that information?
It varies a lot from county to county, and my experience, most are not working to that level of specificity. They want usually a certification from an engineer. Exactly how they couch that, in what terms they couch that, may vary a great deal. I think it's a good tool. Circumstances vary so much from one region to the next that sometimes that may or may not be the best way to do it. So I would just say it depends. I think that's a good way to go, but that's not typically the way most counties work. They're going to look for some kind of certification, some kind of sign-off from an engineer who has qualifications in that area.
And maybe that leads to the question of should potentially the county process be linked more to the GCDs and what they're doing to manage the groundwater supply?
That may be more relevant to the water supplier's permit in relationship with the groundwater district as to where they're drawing their water from, what effect that's going to have on the water, on the water table, or what aquifer the water's coming from. So I think the application of the MAG is going to be more between the water provider and the district as opposed to the county government and the subdivision. So you're relying on the engineer to tell you if the water source has the capability to provide the water, and then it would be that would be a separate. I think that's going to be a separate issue of whether or not the water provider has adequate resources to actually provide that much. So the MAG would come into play with their permit.
So I have one more question that came in. I haven't seen anyone stand up from the audience, and I think we have time for just one more. So this one, again, shifts gears. And it asks for your opinion on sort of the tide we're seeing against local control. And how do you feel about that, and what could potentially be done, if it should be, to shift the tide back toward local control? of groundwater, as well as, I think, other issues is what the author was intending.
Well, for me personally, in my ideological points of view and in my personal experience, those that govern closest to the people govern the best. I think it's the best form of governments that we have. It's most effective, it's most efficient, it's most relatable, it's most flexible, and responsive to your community. I've been disappointed about some of the attacks on local governments in the state of Texas over the past few years. I don't believe it's consistent with good forms of government. I don't believe it's consistent, frankly, with basic conservative Republican standards and long-term settings and values. So I know a lot of colleagues have been going to the Capitol expressing these concerns, particularly when more than ever our local governments are being asked to do more and more at the same time. So I believe we should go the other direction and should empower local and regional people to govern and to support our communities, because I think it's the best form of government and the most representative and the most effective and efficient.
I would absolutely agree with the sentiment. I think that Texas has embarked on what ultimately will be a very dangerous trend in stripping authority from local entities, local governments, and centralizing the authority in Austin. One cautionary comment, though, I'll throw into that. As we know, there are major groundwater resources in this state that don't respect jurisdictional boundaries. And there's a great deal of variation from one groundwater district to the next on how they approach their responsibilities. So I think that there's a qualifier there. I think as long as talking strictly about groundwater districts, as long as you're doing a good job in developing your science and managing your resources properly, then you need to be left alone and allowed to do your job. And I've been very, very pleased with the way groundwater districts have evolved in the state of Texas. They were very controversial back when we got ours created in Bell County, and there was a lot of pushback against it at the time. But it was absolutely the right thing to do. At some point, though, it may be necessary to step up to a higher level and look at some of these groundwater resources on a more regional basis and not just at the local basis, simply because the geology again doesn't respect the jurisdictional boundary.
I agree with my colleagues here to my left that county government is the truest form of government we have in the state of Texas, because you elect people in your county to be representative of the county itself. And you can go to Walmart or go to church or go to a football game on Friday night, and you will see those elected colleagues, and guess what? You get asked lots of questions during that time. It happens all the time. That's the truest form of government there is county government. So what I'm trying to say is the partnership between county government and water districts is very important, because I would much rather be able to discuss it with my own director in Pecos County than to have to call Austin, Texas, and discuss it with some politician up there that's been elected by people that I don't even have in my district. So do I get treated correctly or efficiently? I don't believe so. So the truest form is to have control on a local level.
I want to add 2 quick points to that. One, I made the statement of flexibility, and the Commissioner brought up a good point about the boundaries and the jurisdictional lines. Part of that flexibility should give locals and regionals the ability to collaborate and to put those types of agreements together. You don't need, and I don't believe that was in your intention, but you don't need the state to tell you to do that. You need the flexibility to go out and do that on your own. And second, We live in one of the largest, most diverse states in the United States of America, and one of the most diverse, largest places in the world. The idea that you think that you can dictate from a centralized place sitting in Austin, Texas, what's best overall for this entire state, to me, just doesn't make a lot of sense considering how different and diverse our state really is.
And how different and diverse our resources are. Yes, ma'am. You know, and the location of those resources. It's all applicable. In closing, is there any one issue or one thought or one recommendation that the panelist would have, a one sentence, a one-liner? What are your thoughts about today and what you'd like to see going forward in collaborations in groundwater?
Well, as others have stated, it's encouraging to see all of you here. I see people from a lot of different places in the state that are concerned and working on these issues. I think it's important not only to educate current leadership. I think it's important to make sure that we make a focus on young people and help them understand these issues so that next generation be prepared. As Texas continues to grow and change, our resources will become more limited. We're going to need a more sophisticated citizenship to manage this and at the same time preserve the great things that we love about our state of freedom and independence.
I'll just repeat what I said earlier. I think the key in what we all do is invest in science. Do a better job of understanding what we've got and what the challenges are, and then proselytize. You know, you've just got to get out there and be sure that you're not the only expert in the room, and do everything you can to inform the public in addition to informing elected officials. I like the comment that was just made about the educating kids, educating the young generation coming up. You know, the thing that has struck me over the years, I grew up at a time when we didn't worry about water. You know, you either had it or you didn't, and those of us who had it assumed we'd always have it. But the simple fact is, it is a finite resource, as we all know far too well. And there's nothing finite about population growth in Texas. We're gonna see a day when, as we've already seen, you're talking about those beautiful springs out there that don't flow anymore. We're going to see more and more pressure on the groundwater resources we have across the state of Texas, including in areas that currently don't have a problem. And I think if everybody wakes up and realizes that you know, we've got a precious, finite resource, we've got to manage it wisely.
I agree with my colleagues on both of their statements. I would like to say that I agree with the education of the public, the education of your cities and your councils and your county courts, your water districts on how finite water resources actually are, because we need to stick together and work for what's the best for the communities today and for tomorrow. And if you do that, you never have to look over your shoulder to see who's coming after you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here with each of you and the opportunity to moderate the panel. I appreciate it. Thank you.
That was an amazing discussion. Thank you, guys.